think as I've gotten older over the years, I appreciate logic a lot more. And people, like, I like surrounding myself with people that's like thinkers and people that know how to like be proactive and get things done and be organized. I kind of have a hard time being around, I guess, people that's not as structured because I feel like it's funny. I feel like I kind of seen the pendulum swing in my life. Like growing up, I grew up in a very structured house, like in a very religious house. So it was very structured. So I wanted that freedom. So when I kind of got out on my own and started living on my own, I kind of had a lot of that. And then now I feel like I'm in a place where I'm like, all right, I need that structure, like like that logical. Like I can't just be making a lot of impulse decisions or going off of like what other people around me want. I need to figure out, okay, what makes sense for me. What's the most logical step to do for this? Because that's especially as like kind of bringing in my own personal life of like learning how to becoming an entrepreneur and like a business owner and stuff like that. You really have to learn how to be more practical and logical. You can't just make impulse decisions all the time. Like if you know you have to spend X amount of dollars to do this for your business, but you want to go to a concert that's going to be next week, you got to make that decision. Like, okay, I really want to go to this concert with my friends because it'll be fun, but logically, I need to go save this money or invest this money in this. Like, I think as I've gotten older, I'm starting to like realize logic is actually pretty important. Because I used to kind of feel like people that were super, I guess, rational and stuff, I thought they was like really rigid and sometimes boring. I'm like, y'all always just trying to be so straight and narrow. Like, where's the fun? Like, I feel like a lot of the men I was around was kind of like that, and I didn't really vibe with that all the time. But like now, as I gotten older, I appreciate that a lot more. So now I'm starting to find like the balance, incorporating the balance between the two, because it's like we each have each side within us. Like the left, the right brain, like so finding the balance, I would say. But I appreciate logic a lot more actually. I like it.
Yeah, definitely. The past couple years, I've really come to appreciate logic, and also, even though it's not technically logic, but it's based on logic structure um, in my life and in a lot of things. I realized how much I've appreciated it, especially when I first got into college. I was so good at structuring everything. I figured out like how good I actually am at like putting my mind to it, like how good it also feels to be able to structure something in a good like stable way that like when you play it out that it works in a good fashion, and it's something that you can like not like copy and paste, but you can apply it to a lot of different things in life, like with essays or just different things in general, like making a schedule for school or for like your daily life. Like I'm doing that right now, but what do you call it? Uh, like he said, I think your parents do play a really big role in how you grow up, whether it be about your feelings or with logic. And I think that's where I kind of, not a disconnect, but had a kind of like back and forth, and not really as much back and forth, but just I'm in the middle, and I've just been kind of in the middle, more swinging towards my feelings since a younger age. But because my mom's an INFP and my dad's an ENTJ, so my dad is very very structured, and ever since he like I'm 20 years old, my youngest sibling is 17, and we still have in the bathroom in the shower thing on the wall that says how to shower. It's like step one, wet your hair. Step two, like I'm not even joking. And like,
Wow,
yeah. So like
that's crazy.
my dad is extremely, extremely structured, and especially with the three kids, me, my twin brother, and then my younger sister, we're all neurotypical, and as is my mom. And I'm like very ADHD, as my twin. He's on the autistic spectrum as well, and it's just there's not a whole lot of structure in people that are like that usually. And my mom's also extremely ADHD too, so it's caused me to like tend to be very like not like against logic, but I'm not even thinking about logic. I'm just like just thinking and doing, and that's what I've been doing since a young age. But as I started to get older, especially right after I graduated high school, um, I really started to realize, like when I was like started realizing, oh, I need to save my money. Like the semester's upcoming, I'm about to start college, and I need to start saving money because I'm just like spending it on random stuff all the time. And then I was like, okay, I kind of need to start thinking about things in a more practical way than just going with life as it goes and thinking ahead and stuff like that. But finding a good medium in between, I felt, is what works best for me, because sometimes I have a tendency to jump and do one or the other, and I can be so like structured or logical that I'm doing it too much, and it's like setting me back from the actual point of what I'm trying to get done, or like if I'm trying to problem solve or whatever. If I'm looking too deep, too much into it, trying to think too hard about it, it can set me back. But finding a good middle ground and just being able to use logic, especially in even in like problem scenarios, like with social dynamics. Like if someone comes up to me, oh, this person said this, but I think whatever, blah 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 blah. You can still apply logic to that in order to figure out the fastest, like what's the word, conclusion to it at times. Like with, even when emotion is involved, you can still use logic. Okay, so if this person said this to the other person and this person had this reaction, why would they have that reaction? And it's like, okay, well, this other person did something that makes them not like this reaction. Okay, there's the problem solved. Like you can apply it to a lot of different things, and it's just generally really helpful to use when you tend to be a person that kind of goes with the flow or doesn't think logically all the time in every aspect of their life. But yeah, it's pretty much it.
I see logic as an attempt to map reality or map experience. So it works really well if you use it as a map, and really badly if you use it as the territory itself. So basically, logic can tell you, like a map, where to go, where to look for different things, what patterns are going to show up in the actual environment. And that works really well if you're trying to get somewhere specific, like you're trying to start or maintain a business, or you're trying to understand what's going on in a complex situation like a social interaction. It kind of gives you a flow chart or a map of what might be happening. But then the whole point of a map is for you to look at the map for as long as you need to know where to go, and then go in that direction and pay attention to what's around you while you're traveling and when you get there. And I think the biggest, I think there are two major problems we can run into with the use of logic. One is never looking away from the map and never actually experiencing reality directly, which is far, far more complex than the map. And the whole point of the map is to get you into the experience. And then secondly, assuming you can map things that are more complex than you can put down on paper. So like social situations, it's really great to map it to try and navigate them. It's often a very bad idea to take something like MBTI and assume that that's an entire map of the person, right? Or to put people in categories and then assume that they fit that category completely. The other relationship with logic I would say I've had is that attempt to find safety in it, in assuming that if I had a logical system that everything in reality fit into, therefore I would be, I guess it really was an attempt for safety. I just felt like that was what I needed to do, and a lot of it was feeling like I couldn't just step into the maelstrom of reality and navigate it in person. I had to just stay in the map. And there are some logical principles that are going to be able to be universally applied. Like if you get into very rigorous logic classes, logic is very, very precise and very applicable broadly. But for most people, I would say logic has a lot more intuition and subjectivity in it than we like to admit. Like whether or not something makes sense to you or works as a structure for you is very subjective. So I think that's our other potential error, is assuming that, the map you're using is completely objective. But I will say, having come out of attempting to, live in the map and now working to make new maps of the reality I'm trying to experience, I would echo some of the things people said here, where if you can make a map for your day or your career path or anything like that, it frees you up to get into what's happening in the moment, because it basically takes that impulse to plan for the future or look into the future or look into the past and gets it out of your way so it's not distracting you.
Yeah, that's really good. And I've found, especially now that I'm in sort of the professional world, working with a lot of people who are on the total other side of the spectrum as far as thinking logically and just very, very much right-brained, everything in its proper position. The more that I allow myself, or the more that I force myself to sort of plan ahead, and then sort of align myself with the general meta narrative of whatever goal we're going after, it gives me that freedom to kind of be the impulsive person that I would much rather be. But to the original question, for me, one of the things that I feel like maybe I might be a little confused on is the term like logic, because I think in my head I might be confusing like logic with methodical, and logical to me is like, logical is probably synonymous with unemotional, and methodical to me sort of has this idea of planning out in advance. So like, I definitely don't think that I'm methodical. I think that I'm pretty unemotional when it comes to making decisions, but that unemotional, logical side of me is definitely very impulsive. So like, if I'm going down the street and I'm hungry, I'll stop at a random restaurant that I've never been to before because it's a random restaurant that I've never been to before. It's not that I'm thinking out, but what if I don't like it? What happens if I eat there and I don't like it? Am I have to go to? It's not really that. It's just, I know that if I eat it and if I don't like it, it's going to be okay. Like, it's not the end of the world. I don't necessarily consider that methodical, but it is unemotional. I don't know. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Nah, I that makes a lot of sense. I'm the same way. It's like you're looking.
Yeah, like it's gonna be like it's gonna be all right. Yeah, like it's just gonna be all right. So I feel like the older I've gotten, the more, honestly, the more emotional that I've gotten, because I've always been very unemotional. I've always known that everything's gonna work out. If I just keep doing the right thing, and I'm a Christian, I don't know where you guys stand on that, but like, I think that as long as I do what I know I'm supposed to be doing, it's all going to work out in the end. So there's no need to get, super hung up on anything. Like, there's no reason to get pissy about it because it's going to work out. So I don't necessarily get emotional about those things. But I also think that I think them through very well either. So I don't know. That probably doesn't make sense, but I think that's authentic.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It's crazy to hear other ENFJs speak. Like, it's like somebody's in my head and they just saying.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even like all the answers that were here, because for me, if I'm going to answer that question, like I'd say that a certain age came where I became like almost addicted to logic, but not in the sense of like what's methodical. I think for me, I've always been very like socially strategic. I've always been very methodical, like a long-term planner, like seeing like the dominoes of the interpersonal in a way. Like, if I make Cameron feel this way, he's most likely going to say this, and then that's going to probably get Lonnie to do this, and then Emrys might respond that. So I like naturally just quickly think of that, like even before I got into type. And so, but to me, that's not really like necessarily logical. In fact, if we're making it technical, I would say that's my FE and I working together with some SE in there. But then when I'm thinking of like logical, like not like the TE way of like putting things in motion, I'm thinking of like I became obsessed with like apologetics, for example. Like, okay, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God who died on the who died and then he resurrected on the third day, whatever, whatever. And so therefore, I'm also like, because I believe this, I don't want to just have like blind faith, like some people that I know who just like, no, this is just how I grew up. I want to look at as many facts as possible. And if I find that I'm wrong, then I'm gonna be like, thank you for giving me the right answer. I'm tossing that and I'm keeping this. And so now, like, as I've continued to grow, I've continued to look more at like logical deductions and stuff. And like and even then like having to look at like what's empirical, like what's something that's just unified reality, which I would deem as like SE, versus what is logical, like in a TI sense, introverted thinking sense, where it's like, okay, I can build like one thing about introverted thinking that I've realized is like even when they have it as like a dominant function, they can build the most convoluted structure, argument, whatever it might be, and they can make it airtight. But just because it makes airtight sense doesn't mean that it's right. And that was something that I really had to come to grips with. Like, dang. And sometimes I would even hear other people's logic, and I'm like, something's telling me it's like that's not right. But they have such a more eloquent way of like presenting it in such an airtight, like Jenga framework of some sort that like, man, I know that it's not right. Something about this structure is off, but I don't have the logical capacity to be able to pick this apart the way that I want to, which would make sense as an ENFJ inferior, like TI type of person. But as I've continued to grow, then like I've even to this day, like, you know, I've been like continuing to investigate more and more and wanting the truth to the best of my ability that I can like get to it. Like, and so kind of like even like what Cam is saying is like, I don't really care about my feelings. Like, you know, sometimes like, especially like as a, like, you know, when I was like, especially like as a Christian, then it's like people used to say things like to me that's like, yeah, I don't really believe in God, or I don't really, you know, like God because he inserts this over here, and I don't really like that, and so I don't believe in him. I'm like, well, that doesn't make logical sense because at the end of the day, I mean, I don't like what that, you know, this is a rule or whatever either. But at the end of the day, if God is real, he's real regardless of how I feel or not about his rules. And regardless of how I feel or not, he's probably still going to send my butt to hell. And so it's like, I can feel like, well, God, I don't like you and I don't believe in you because you don't approve of homosexuality as far as I know of in the Bible or whatever like that. But then it's like, well, like that doesn't make me as God like less existent or whatever. So I'd have to like come to terms with that. Like, hey, truth is truth regardless of how I feel. But then continuing to search for that truth and seeing how like, okay, again, even if I make the best arguments, it doesn't mean that it's right. And even if somebody else makes the best arguments, doesn't mean that it's right. And so the best thing that I can do is just always be in a humble position where I'm learning as much as I can, gathering as many perspectives as I can from different people, which is our NI, our introvert intuition. So that's the best thing that we can do. And then finding ways to be able to like just kind of have my own framework of the world that's continuing to develop as this like conglomerate of the things that I've collected. So that's kind of how I view logic and my relationship with it. Like I said, I've always had like an apologetic study Bible where like as you flip through it, it's like, yeah, so this is how we also know that Jesus existed because in 1843 and like well, all these little blurbs and like facts throughout because I'm just all about like the logic in that way. But and like it doesn't matter how I feel about it, like I'm gonna say the truth. Or I want to accept the truth kind of thing. But then at the same time, especially as I've been realizing recently, we don't always know 100%. Like there's what the absolute truth might be, and that's what's been like interesting. Because again, everybody has their own logic. Christianity will say like, oh, we believe that Jesus is this, is that, because boom, 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 boom. Ravi Zacharias, before we found out how much of a monster that he was and everything like that. He was like one of my heroes. Like he explained Christianity in such a logical way. And then, and I always preferred people to him. And I'm like, I don't know the answer to this, but I know Ravi does. So, but then who was maybe the Muslim Ravi Zacharias? Who was the, like Buddhist Ravi Zacharias? They all have their own logic. And it's like at the end of the day, historians, one historian's going to say this, another historian's going to say that. It's like, dang, I don't really know. Everybody just has their own logic, their own experiences. So at the end of the day, I just got to come up with whatever I have and, go with that. So that's what I have to say on that one.
I wanted to add to that because this is like a conversation I've had with a lot of my more intuitive friends about like just the whole idea of like what truth is, because it's interesting, like even hearing you talk about religion and how like, I grew up in religion. I wouldn't, I guess, classify myself as religious anymore, but it's interesting, and I feel like truth, at least in my opinion, truth is very subjective. Truth is very subjective to your experiences, what you've been through, how you was raised. That's why like I have a hard time with the absolute truths, because it's like, in my mind, it's always a matter of perspective. Because you see how you brought up like what's the person's name, rabbi, or who's like the rabbi of like Islam or like Buddhism, or like you have all these different religions, and I feel like religions and like political parties and all these different things, they're just different perspectives or interpretations of the same thing. At least to me, like I feel like religions are just different interpretations of what we think life is supposed to mean. And then the main characters were like the main people, I guess, who were like the thought leaders. So like the Jesuses, the Buddhas, those are the people that people follow. So their story got emulated, So to me, it's like I always had a hard time, even as a kid. I always had a hard time with like these absolute truths of like, well, this is just the truth, no matter what. Like you just got to believe it or accept it. And I've always been like, but why though? Like I always question it. I still kind of do that. I find myself doing that even more to this day, because I just feel like a lot of stuff is subjective. Because it's like if you dive deep into people's history and you dive deep into how they was raised, what their parents were, who they were around, their environment, and you realize their experience and their perspective of the world is crafted because of like what they experienced. That's why when I get into debate, I don't even like to say debates, but when I have conversations with people about like really touchy topics like religion or sexuality or politics or like a lot of other stuff, it's funny like just seeing how people can get so personal with it so quickly. Like, well, no, I feel this way. This is right. Like, people get really like they feel it. Like they get really personal with it, and I have to take a step back and be like, yo, like it's subjective. Like that's your experience and how you view the world. At least to me, like that's why I don't really try to like, I guess, push my own logic on other people, because I want to give people that space to think for themselves. Like I was always that kid, like, yo, like you want to come to your own conclusions. I don't feel like we should be forced to like have to adopt a certain way. Like I think that's the beauty. That's the beauty in like how we were created. Like we were all different, But I just wanted to add that.
No, that's word. And what I will say is like, so I was definitely not that kid. I did assert my opinion on other people, like especially when I became a Christian. Like looking at older people.
I used to do that too, actually, a lot.
Oh yeah, you was a Jehovah's Witness. You was knocking on doors, so you can't even talk. You was worse than me. But yeah, like for me, like I saw it as like, okay, this is the truth, kind of like again, like what I was raised with. And people just don't understand what the truth is. And now even to this day, even though I'm like way less like of the type to assert my opinion on the people, because I'm like, I don't know what absolute truth is. I do still, and I think I told you this before, like my personal opinion on it. I believe that there is still an absolute truth, It's just that everybody's perception of the truth is subjective. So I can have a subjective perspective that, yo, the world is spherical, as Josh Peck would say. Whereas somebody could have a subjective perspective that the world is flat. Maybe the world really is just a cube or something. I don't know. But somebody could be right, even though they have a subjective perspective of it. But because they're right, like, it's the absolute truth is there. Like, the law of non-contradiction. Is God real or is God not? If I believe that God is real, or if I believe that God is not, that's not going to change the fact that he's real or that he's not. There's still an absolute truth that's there. And whatever I think does not influence what happens to the absolute truth. So, but I get what you're saying, though. I think that what you're saying is like, it's hard for people to be able to really know what the absolute truth is. Nobody can prove that God is real, just like nobody can prove that God is fake. And so therefore, we're just all looking at the spiritual realm and we're calling it different things based off of our experiences. And even though there is an absolute truth there, we just don't understand it. So therefore, we're saying like, yeah, so let's not push what our subjective interpretations is. The best that I can do, like, is just explain like, hey, this is just the logic that I have right now as of this time. And, I'm presenting it to you. If it makes sense to you, run with it. If it doesn't, that's cool. I'm not here to enforce my opinion because shoot, I don't know. All I know is that the more that I learn, the more that I realize that I don't really know things. And so therefore, boom, boom, boom. But I can still teach you what I've come to right now. Like Salvador, he's one of my clients. And we have Bible study, like we're going through Proverbs and everything like that. And it's like, no, do I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God or whatever? Do I know that? Absolutely. Do I know that empirically, like over here? If we're being honest, and I've said it on my channel, probably not. Like empirically, as in like I can 100% I have the faith, and I have reason to back up that faith, but I can't say like it's empirical, like, oh, I can prove it to everybody kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I might believe what is the absolute truth, or I might just have a subjective perspective of what the absolute truth is. So that's kind of how I see it.
So one of the interesting elements that I notice in this discussion is that when we're talking about truth, we're largely talking about like what works within a certain framework or environment. Like if you're living 3,000 years ago and you walk outside and you look around and the earth looks basically flat, and you're using that idea to build a mental model of reality that helps you navigate your life, like that works well enough. If you fly to space and then try to hold on to that same model, it starts not working as well. And the interesting thing is like, that seems to be the only way we can define truth in practice, like whatever is actually working when we test it in some way. Because otherwise you've just got sort of ad hoc assertions, like this is true, and you just accept that. There's no way for you to test that. There's no way for you to examine that and see if it makes sense internally or in interaction with the external world. It's just true. And we know well enough that that doesn't work very well, because you can say that with anything. Like I can just blithely assert I'm a 10-foot tall platypus, and if I say you can't question that, then I can say that that's true, and that it's like revealed to me or something, and that all of you are just not seeing the truth. But if I can't test that in some way, it's not even going to work for me. So I think one of the reasons that we run into the subjectivity problem so much is that every single person brings a new environment in which to test the truth. So let's say there is objective truth. It's like, okay, well, none of us are seeing it objectively, right? Like there's no way for you to step outside your own perception. Like if you stepped outside perception entirely, you would either not see anything, or you would see everything all at once, and then there would be no way to differentiate anything. So you wouldn't see anything anyway. That's the old idea that like a void and an infinity are the same thing, because there's no lines anymore. So I think that we run into this the more we interact with people, that it's like, okay, what is working for me and the perspectives and models of reality that are working for me may not work for you at all. And when we compare our models that we think are super different, we may actually find out they're very similar and just using different language to describe very similar experiences. And then sometimes we'll run into models that seem to completely contradict or be extravagantly different from our own, and still, if we take the other person's perspective, see that it's working for that person as best they can. So I think that's where the principle of like trying to help people search out truth for themselves is really important, because they're the only ones who are going to be able to find what works for them and like test it. And it is important to challenge, what you are thinking is working for you, what you are thinking is your most accurate model of reality. But if you're testing it and over and over and over, it's like standing up to the test. Like it's standing up to tests of internal consistency and standing up to tests of seeing how it interacts with the external world. But there's a part of you going, I just can't accept this because somebody told me at this time that this wasn't true. It's like, well, okay, so for what reason are you weighting the stated opinion of that person over your experience?
That's really good. I don't want to keep going down this wormhole either, because I know we get way off subject. But it's just really interesting to hear all that stuff. Emrys, I would kind of push back on you though, with what you were saying, only because I think this whole sort of subject is cyclical, right? The idea that everybody can test for themselves the subjective truth that works best for them. I mean, that's an absolute truth, right? To suggest that somebody is able to do that. I
don't know if this will change your answer, but I would say that's not necessarily absolute, because for some people they're unable to test it, or for some people they're unable to discover new models that work. So I don't know if that's like, I'm not claiming.
I would still just say those are absolutes too. I mean, the fact that some people would be able and some people wouldn't, those are absolutes in and of themselves. So it's like at some point we have to, even if it is subjective, you have to sort of establish some sort of subjective absolute that everybody agrees on in order to build. That's the only way you can have a culture. That's the only way you can have a community. That's the only way you could have dialogue. Like, I don't know. It's just it's kind
of is red and white. Do we all agree?
Actually, I'm colorblind, so.
Oof. He doesn't
the term subjective absolute is a really good one.
Right. Yeah. Which is why, by the way, extroverted sensing is like so important, because extroverted sensing is Cam, for you, like, Tay. So he has extroverted sensing as a dominant function. He'll look at this. If we all start being philosophical about this, he's like, boy, that's a damn like red and white cup. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's extroverted sensing, like, at its best. Like, I'm just seeing things for what it is. Unified reality. Let's move on. Whereas like the introvert intuition is like, oh, let's peer deeper. Let's start digging this. Like, what is truth? What is all of that? And it's like, we need to have that kind of like balance of that. And then the introverted thinking is like, well, if I delete this and if I do this, so yeah. But
it's kind of like what Emery said earlier about the map, and how, like, I forgot how he explained it, but like using the map as like the tool to like get into reality or something.
Oh yeah.
He said something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the same thing with like the objective functions, like sensing and like thinking and stuff like that. They kind of help us, give us those like objective things that we know are concrete. Because like you said, we could be debating all day, like, okay, well, this is subjective, this is subjective. You can look at it from this perspective, but it's like ultimately you got to have some type of common denominator to where it's like, okay, we can all agree. Most of the population agrees the earth is round. Even though I personally don't really know 100%, might be flat, who knows? But overall, most of us agree, okay, the earth is probably round. They've been to space, quote unquote, they've been to space. So, that's what most of us can agree.
But have they been in space? Have they been in space?
NASA could be playing us. It could be giving us.
But that's a good
like,
point.
Yeah.
I'll think about that up though. I like that you brought that up.
Hey, I just wanted to briefly thank you for taking the time to watch this video, whether it was on regular speed or 2x speed, whatever it was. Just thank you for consuming the content. And around me, you should be able to see a few little buttons and logos for other recommended videos, because, you know, I make good content, new ones, but then I also have some really good old content too that you should probably check out. But make sure that if you really like this video, feel free to subscribe, to share. It really helps this humble channel to expand and reach more people and ultimately help more people. So once again, thanks for watching, and hope you have a great rest of your day.